Let's get our next question here, Jim. Sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from William in Baltimore. I have often heard of listeners asking who is the best wrestler or even a Mount Rushmore of wrestling. However, I would be curious to hear your thoughts on who would be on the Mount Rushmore of the worst wrestlers ever.
Oh my God. See, I don't know whether that would be a Mount Rushmore, maybe whether that would be one of those posters of just, like fucking thousands of people's faces, or like a Sgt. Pepper album cover or something. I mean, immediately you've got to narrow that down a little bit further, because the worst wrestler ever would be somebody that probably none of us have ever seen or heard of.
That goes into what I was wondering, because when you said Moxley's the worst wrestler today a few months back, you said it's because of the way he's being used. Because he's out there. He's not a wrestler you haven't heard of. He's all over the show. So when you talk about the worst wrestler ever, do you think it has to be someone who no one's ever seen who was terrible, or someone who was used prominently and terrible?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It depends on what you're going for. I mean, you can look at any of these clips of indie goofballs on Twitter, trying to set their heads on fire, coming off the roof or whatever, and you can just watch them try to hit the ropes and take a hip toss. You go, well, that's the worst fucking wrestler I've ever seen. But the thing is, nobody's really seeing them. The only reason they're seeing them is on Twitter. In the building, there's 50 people, and nobody knows they exist. And then you've got, the Ultimate Warrior. Is he the worst wrestler of all time that actually got big and made money? Because he never had a good match and was always the shits at both promos and in ring. But because he made all that money because Vince had the fetish over bodybuilders, does that qualify him to be removed from the list of world's worst wrestlers because he made millions of dollars at it? We need more guidance here. Is it the worst because his shit looked incredibly phony, or is he the worst because his shit was so fucking stiff and hard that it would hurt anybody he came in contact with? Is it the giant fat guy that somebody said, well, hey, there's an 800-pound human waterbed. He should be a professional wrestler. And all he can do is fucking blob around and fall on somebody? Or is it the guy that's 126 pounds and looks like a medical school skeleton, and he can run around and do shit, but it's visually preposterous, and you go, why'd they let him in the ring? There's no way to... There have been so many bad wrestlers of various kinds. Marina Shaffer, but we don't know her. So
it took me a second.
Yes. That's the so what kind of bad wrestling are you looking for, and who do we nominate? I mean, there's no way to. I mean, we talk about a list of major league candidates on this program every week, but there's so many more that are even shittier than that are out there in the local halls and bars and things and such and parking lots that you can't really give anybody that honor. Who's the absolute worst?
If you base it on what we actively watch, active wrestlers on AEW's roster and WWE's roster, if you had to pick 2 or 3 from each roster and have a list of 5, or I guess 6 in some cases.
Oh, Jesus.
Who are the worst of the active people you watch?
Well, again, Moxley is obviously... He's not the worst wrestler in the world if you view it in a vacuum, right? Just watch I don't know who this guy is. I'm just watching his movements and him having a match with somebody. He's not the worst. But when you take into account that he's supposed to be on top and he's supposed to be an experienced veteran, and he can do better, probably not great, but better, but he refuses to because he loves garbage deathmatch wrestling, and he's a fan of the bank addicted drug robber and thinks that stuff is just swell. Then that takes him down a bunch of notches, because here's a guy that actually wouldn't be the shits, except he's being the shits on purpose because the way he fucking thinks about things. And then you have Marina Shaffer, who, remember, she had a match with a girl here not long ago where she was putting holds on that weren't even holds and trying to figure out how to bend a girl's leg back.
Big Swole, when she was there, would have been
Big
a candidate.
Swole, she was a candidate.
Yeah.
Right?
Legitimately, someone who couldn't really do the basics in the ring and messed up almost every match. That's a legitimate candidate for worst wrestler on an active roster.
And in AEW, the women's roster has more of the candidates, but in the WWE, well, I mean, take NXT out of the equation because, Jesus, you know, that's the whole idea is they don't know what they're doing. But almost, Jesus Christ. You know, if you're just, he's visually impressive, but goddamn, all his shit looks phony and or like he's in quicksand. So, I'd have to sit down with a list of all the active wrestlers in the world and do a bunch of sub lists and then maybe open it up for voting. I don't know.